And so they wrote to the Assyrian king, a fellow at that time by the name of Esarhaddon, asking him to send back into the territory of the northern kingdom of Israel Israelite priests who would instruct them in the worship of the local gods, so that the local god would not be angry at them and would not be sending these wild animals against them. And indeed, the Bible tells us that Esarhaddon did exactly that. So in effect, these people from outside of Palestine, who had been brought in by the Assyrian king into the territory of the northern kingdom of Israel, became Yahweh worshippers. And they are people that eventually become the Samaritans, who we read about in the New Testament, and who exist in what is today known as the West Bank, in places like Shechem, Nablus, the modern West Bank city of Nablus, to this day, who claim that they are descendants of Israelites who worship Yahweh. They have their own Pentateuch, they have their own temple tradition, and this is these people who, the Samaritans, who were living in the territory of the northern kingdom of Israel at the time that the Judean people were coming back, being restored under King Cyrus of Persia. And so they become a party to all of this as well. So we have, as I say, three groups: the returned exiles, the people who had remained in the land during the exile, and these northerners who had been brought into Palestine by the Assyrians but had become Yahweh worshippers and saw themselves as part of this restored community. Now, we have to understand, and we're going to see this in a moment when we go to some of the other texts, that a theology had developed. It was we saw this in the film that we watched that day that I couldn't make class, that a theology had developed that the exile was God's punishment for the failure of the people to maintain their loyalty to God's covenant. And in response to this failure to remain loyal to God's punishment, to God's covenant, God punished the people. He brought on the Babylonians, and he destroyed the city of Jerusalem and the temple and forced these people into exile. That was their punishment. And so a theology developed that, if the plan, God's plan, was for this covenant community to suffer this punishment in response to their failure in maintaining their commitment to the covenant, if the plan is that they must be punished by exile, then if you follow that theology to its logical conclusion, then only the people who went into exile could be considered legitimate heirs to this covenant. And so a tension developed between these returned exiles, one group, the people who remained on the land, 2, and the northerners, the Samaritans, 3, with the returned exiles feeling like they were the true covenant community. They had suffered God's punishment. They were part of this plan, and the others were not. So when it came time to build the temple, the book of Ezra tells us that there were a group of people that came to this community, and you can read about this particularly in the book of Ezra, chapters 3 and 4. These various people came. I believe it was both people from the northern kingdom, the Samaritans, who saw themselves as Yahweh worshippers, as well as the people who had remained in the land. And they said to these returned exiles who had been sent by the Persian king to rebuild the temple, they said, hey, we'd like to be part of this too. We'd like to help out. And they were told, no, you're not part of this community. Only the returned exiles are the legitimate heirs to this covenant. We suffered this punishment. This was God's plan, and you're not part of the plan. And in fact, the work on building the temple actually had to be postponed because these people complained to the emperor, and there was a period of time where the work on the temple was actually postponed. And it wasn't until, the restoration was 536 BCE. It wasn't until 515 BCE that the temple was actually built. And you can, as I say, read about this. This was our reading in Ezra chapters 1 to 4 that we had for today. But as I say, there was a certain tension between this restored community and the other groups that were in play here. And I think that we see also in our biblical readings that there is a certain tension between a broad universalism, or a universalism, a more inclusive understanding of the covenant community, and this more narrow understanding of the covenant community. Again, another example, in my opinion, of there being different voices in the Bible. It's not univocal, it is polyvocal. There are different voices, and I think we see this in literature, biblical literature that comes out of this period. The book of Ezra is that much more narrow view of the community. You notice that in chapters 9 and 10 of Ezra, he enforces a separation between Jewish men, Judeans who had come back into the restored community. He enforces a separation between them and their Gentile, their foreign wives. He has a very, and it could be, I don't know, it could be a more priestly understanding of a covenant community versus perhaps a more prophetic understanding of a covenant community. But Ezra in chapters 9 and 10 of the book of Ezra enforces a divorce. He forces Jewish men who had married non-Jewish women to divorce them. Now, I want to point out to you that there is a document in the Bible from this same period that, in my opinion, has a different view. And that is what we might come to call Second Isaiah. Remember, I had explained that the book of Isaiah is really a composite work. The first 39 chapters we refer to as First Isaiah. They come from the 8th century BCE. The Isaiah that we read on the previous week from October 16th, the Isaiah that ruled during the period of King Hezekiah, the Isaiah who lived through the Syro-Ephraimite War, 735 to 732 BCE, the Isaiah who witnessed the destruction of the northern kingdom in 722 BCE, the Isaiah that witnessed the invasion of King Sennacherib, 701 BCE. That's Isaiah, the first Isaiah. We sometimes refer to him as Isaiah of Jerusalem. Beginning in chapter 40 of the book of Isaiah, we see that we have a different venue. And the venue is clearly post-exilic. It makes specific reference, for instance, to King Cyrus, to the restoration. And so we refer to this as Second Isaiah from a post-exilic perspective. And some scholars would claim that there is maybe even a third Isaiah, because it is also clear that in those last 26, 27 chapters 40 to 66 of the book of Isaiah, we see a change. We see a change from a very, very optimistic prophet to a prophet that becomes a little bit disgruntled. The optimism, I think, is in the book of Isaiah chapter 40 is immediately discernible. You can see it right away if we take a look, if I can find it quickly enough. Isaiah chapter 40, a beautiful, beautiful passage, very upbeat, very optimistic. He says, the prophet says, "Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and cry to her that she has served her term, that her penalty is paid, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins." And I would suggest to you that this is a prophet witnessing the restoration of the people under King Cyrus, that it is a very optimistic period. He subscribes clearly to this theology that the exile was punishment for the people's failure to maintain their covenant commitments, but they have paid the price. They have paid, it says her penalty has been paid. They've paid double for their sins. They are now being rehabilitated, restored. They've done the crime, paid the time, and they're now rehabilitated and have been restored. And it's a very, very optimistic time. Not only is it a very, very optimistic time, but you will notice that this prophet also makes specific reference to Cyrus. If you go to chapter 44, verse 28, it says, this is the prophet speaking in the name of God, saying, God who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, he shall carry out all my purpose, and who says of Jerusalem, it shall be rebuilt, and of the temple, your foundation shall be laid. He goes on, he says, thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have grasped, to subdue the nations before him and strip kings of their robes, etc., etc. When the prophet refers to Cyrus as God's anointed, this is actually very, very powerful statement. Remember, we said that this word anointed, kings were anointed, right? Priests were anointed. It was their consecration ceremony. And that word anointed in Hebrew, Mashiach, comes into the English language as Messiah. In other words, this second Isaiah is referring to King Cyrus as God's Messiah. And it's God's anointed king. God has appointed this foreign king, this Persian king, to rebuild his city of Jerusalem and to rebuild his temple. Now, not only was this prophet who I'm referring to as second Isaiah very optimistic, but he also had developed a much more universalist understanding. And that's kind of an understatement, a much more universalist understanding of who made up the covenant community, certainly much more universalistic than the prophet, than Ezra, as we saw in the book of Ezra. And these guys are probably roughly contemporary, although I would imagine that this second Isaiah may have prophesied just a bit before, maybe 50 years before Ezra came on the scene. But you'll notice that there is this very universalistic understanding of the covenant community in this second Isaiah.